The humanitarian organization Save the Children reports that at least 290,000 children have been displaced in sub-zero temperatures in Syria. Violence in Syria has been driving families from their homes to camps that have now been overwhelmed by new arrivals, as seen in this new footage from Save the Children. The situation made worse by flooding and windstorms in the freezing winter temperatures. And this latest development comes on the heels of a bloody 9-year conflict in Syria. But our allies, the Kurds, they had escaped much of the violence in that nation as they were teamed up with U.S. forces in the fight against ISIS. However, the situation on the ground changed dramatically after President Trump's surprise announcement last October that U.S. forces would be leaving Syria. But as we saw firsthand yesterday, U.S. forces still remain there. American troops came under fire from Syrian government militia, Russian forces nearby, the Turks close as well. How did it come to this, and what happens to the Kurds after that fateful October decision? Our James Longman brings us this exclusive report.
23-year-old Lazgin may never walk again. He's a Kurdish SDF soldier, and in October he was near the front lines when Turkey invaded northern Syria.
We were in a house, we were in a group, and the airstrikes hit us.
Lazgin was fighting a battle he doesn't believe he would have needed to if the US hadn't abruptly changed course. He paid a heavy price, but he's still alive. Hayal was a medic who was killed in an airstrike as he was getting the injured to safety. A family's life shattered in an instant. His father fears his son won't be the last casualty the Turks take. He fully expects Turkey to be back a second, third, fourth time, but he says they'll be resilient and ready. And we met Sheikh Humus Ali Ahmed, a fourth-generation baker who lost his home, his job, and his son. All this at the hands of the Turks, who'd been threatening the move for years.
How do you feel when you see headlines that say things like the US betrayal of the Kurds?
Our partnership is still strong now, as indicated, because we're standing right here in Syria with them, and we continue to work with them every day.
Driving through here, you can almost forget this part of Syria had until recently escaped much of the conflict that's destroyed so much of the rest of the country. Thousands were injured, hundreds died during that deadly October Turkish invasion that outraged much of the world. Outrage because it only came after Donald Trump announced he'd be pulling all US troops, a stabilizing force, out of northern Syria. A decision made following a phone call with Turkey's president.
I was going to do this 9 months ago, and we were not at 100%, but we were pretty close. Everyone said, can we get to 100%? Now I get to 100%. And they say, well, maybe we could stay longer. I say, well, when do we get out? There's got to be a time we get out. We have to bring our people back home.
America's decision to leave blindsided the Kurds. They were proud to have fought and died alongside US troops in the long war against ISIS. They were on the front lines, rooting out the terrorist group from their last stronghold. We saw for ourselves 1 year ago the famed final battle at Baghouz.
In the distance, not much to see because most of the town is flattened. That is where the fight is going on. And at night, the sky is lit up with rocket and gunfire.
They'd celebrated victory just months earlier. Now the word on their lips was betrayal. So the administration backtracked. Some US troops did stay in Syria, but not before abandoning more than half of the territory in which they'd operated. The initial force of around 1,000, now down to half. And their mission made more complex than ever, trying to maintain a fragile peace between countries and factions that moved in to fill the vacuum.
It's just, you get the sense of this kind of eerie stalemate having taken over in this part of Syria. This kind of situation which is so delicate, which if any of the parties move, it could all go up. You've got the Russians, the Turkish, the Syrian regime, and the Americans all sharing this space. And it's quiet for now, but at any moment, it could all change.
And it did change. Just yesterday, American troops came under fire at a checkpoint from pro-Syrian regime militia, the US killing one during a tense gunfight. The Americans have a delicate task at hand, and we were given rare access to these US Army patrols in northeast Syria. They're here in part to ensure Russia, whose troops swooped in after the partial US withdrawal, now stays out of the areas controlled by the Kurds. We spoke exclusively to the commander of US Special Operations in Iraq and Syria.
Right up where the Turks are. Yeah. It looks pretty delicate up there, with all the different moving pieces, the Russians and you guys, and the Syrians and the Turkish all occupying the same kind of quarter-mile space. It looks
right. Yeah, there's some tight areas, but we have a pretty solid deconfliction protocol that we work with the forces up there. They understand who we are and what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're very clear with them where our areas are.
A couple of run-ins with the Russians.
They need to stay out of that area. We've had a few.
US and Russian troops are involved in frequent standoffs. It's a constant game of cat and mouse in a region already fraught with danger.
Must be pretty strange, though, to see, a Russian flag and an American flag up against one another in Syria.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But we are focused on making sure that everything that is de-escalated.
And that's not all they're here to do.
It's the oil in this part of Syria that is being protected by the United States. You can see the US convoy that we turned up in there. But ultimately, the end goal is a political solution and possibly some kind of autonomy for the Kurds. And it's this oil that'll make that autonomy possible.
It's a small step in rebuilding the relationship with the Kurds after the October shock. But there is much work to be done.
My son's friend called me to say he was dying, but we were busy running from the bullets.
Ali was never able to recover his son's body. All he has left of him is his martyr's portrait and his 7-month-old daughter, Marianne.
Miriam.
The family, like too many in this country, now refugees in their own home.
Inside me, a fire is burning. All we can do is cry.
Some refuse to stay in these camps. It takes imagination to survive in Syria.
A lot of people, when they got pushed out of their homes, didn't want to go to camp, so they made their way to places like this, schools. There are more than 60 of these derelict schools where families are living. But it is not a place of learning. It is cold and damp, and these kids haven't learned anything in months. شو اسمك؟ وفراد. اسمك ايه؟ وفراد. My name is Wafrad. It's very cute.
All across this part of Syria are memories of October's war and the fallout it created. Yet another generation made homeless, yet more children fighting to survive. And looming on the horizon, perhaps yet more conflict to come. Lasgin has a long road to recovery. His only wish, to go abroad for treatment so he can rejoin his friends in the battles he knows aren't far away. Syria's Kurds have no nation to truly call their own, and they have many enemies. They're counting on their only ally to not let them down again.
And James Longman joins us now live. James, this situation seems extremely precarious. Talk to us more about the things that U.S. troops are doing to try to not start an accidental war with the Russians.
Yes, Lindsay, that's really fascinating. They're called interdictions, these moments when US soldiers come up against Russian soldiers out in the roads here in northeastern Syria. And there's a certain amount of theatre involved because actually the Russians give a bit of notice to the Americans before they turn up. At higher levels, officers talk to one another. They actually tell the Americans that they're planning to go into an area they're not meant to. Sure enough, the next day, American convoy goes into that zone, finds the Russians and tells them where to go. Inside these convoys as well, on the Russian side, quite high-ranking officers, we're told, generals often as well. And so you have these rather human engagements. Yes, the geopolitical context is extraordinarily serious, but these kind of very simple engagements between one commander and another, one representing the United States, the other Russia, and using often Google Translate on their phones to try to communicate, and then off they go in their separate ways. But there is a malevolence to the Russian presence. remember that US convoy that was attacked here in Syria. To one side, we saw in those images a Russian convoy watching that happen. And so it's just the Russians pushing buttons, adding pressure to see where they can kind of pressurize the Americans, and the potential for conflict is very, very high.
And you mentioned words like betrayal in your story. After the Turkish invasion, talk to us about what they did to ensure greater security, especially considering U.S. troop levels were in essence cut in half.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, the Kurds have to walk a fine line. They're always going to need some kind of relationship with President Bashar al-Assad, the regime of Bashar al-Assad. But I think it's fair to say, after the events of October, the Kurds were kind of pushed further in his direction. Just this week, there's been a Kurdish delegation in Damascus. The Russians are involved in this. They want to be a peace broker. It's just about other countries inserting themselves in spaces that the Americans have moved away from.
And you spent time with the troops. What can you tell us about how they feel about these new realities on the ground?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think these US soldiers, they would never say anything openly. They're very professional. They have a real understanding of the geopolitical context in which they're functioning. But I think there must be in the backs of their minds a sense that at any moment there could be a phone call, there could be a tweet that rips up the work that they're doing. They were involved in work to the west of here. They had to get out very, very quickly. And I think there is a sense that perhaps the work here that is being done could come to an abrupt end. We were on the base. We got a sense that US presence here in northeastern Syria isn't going anywhere for the time being. That could change, but certainly it is a very precarious situation here, Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.